Hi, this is Mr. Worski, and this is the second plant screencast. This should be the last slide that we looked at comparing monocots and dicots. And if you didn't get it before, you might want to copy this chart down or refer to it or draw some pictures that look like this next to the other qualities of monocots and dicot. So we are going to start today talking about the flower. Now, I want you to write down all the functions of all these different flower parts. So, like, for example, the sepal protects the bud, and remember the bud is the baby flower. The receptacle holds all parts of the plants together. Petals attract insects. The stamen is the male part, and there are two parts of the male part: the filament, which holds up the anther, and the anther, which produces sperm. The carpel and the pistil, one or more carpels. A pistil is one or more carpels. There are three parts to the pistil. The stigma, which is kind of sticky and it catches pollen, so it catches the plant sperm. And we have the style, which connects the stigma to the ovulary. And the ovulary contains ovules, which houses the eggs. Again, if you need to at any time, please pause the video so that you can get the notes down. But by now, you should know that. Now, here's a picture of the flower. And again, I always love you to draw these simple pictures here. We have, for example, the receptacle here, yes. The sepal here, which protects the bud. We have the petals, which attract the insects. This here is the pistil with the stigma, the style, and the ovulary, which holds the ovary. We have the stamen, which is the filament, and the anther. And I think that's about it. Draw the picture. So now we have incomplete flowers, which have no petals, and imperfect flowers, which only have one gender, which are more evolutionarily advanced than the ones that have two genders, which would be the perfect flower. So there are two types of reproduction for plants. There's the asexual and sexual. Okay, asexual, vegetative propagation, in which one plant might fall on the ground, become watered or moist, and then sprout roots and then grow into a larger plant. We do this all the time with our fruit trees. Tubers are modified underground stems. I too thought that they were modified roots, but they are not. So things like potatoes, those are modified stems. Now there are buds coming from the tuber that can grow into new plants. And stolons or runners, they are basically things that reach out here over ground stems, and they grow daughter plants from those stems. So those, and that happens all times in strawberries, especially. And you got to cut those runners in order for the parent plant to be healthy and produce lots of strawberries. Sexual reproduction, we need to talk both about the development of the egg as well as development of the sperm. We're first going to focus on the egg because it's much more complicated in the development of the sperm. In the ovulary, you have something known as the megaspore mother cell. Yep, and that goes through meiosis to produce 4 haploid cells, 3 die. Now this should sound familiar. This happens in pine trees too. One haploid cell undergoes 3 mitotic divisions. That's different. And you will form 8 haploid cells. What are you talking about? Well, you have one haploid cell goes from 1 to 2 in one division, 2 to 4 in the second division, 4 to 8 in the third division. So you have 8 haploid cells. Now, one of those things is the egg cell. There's going to be 2 nuclei to form the endosperm mother cell, which will become the baby food. On the other side of the egg, we have synergids, which attract and guide pollen tubes. I'm going to show you a picture of this moment. So synergids, so you have 3 cells at the bottom. The central cell will be an egg cell. We have 2 cells on either side of the egg cell called synergids, which take the pollen tube and guide it toward the egg. And then you have the endosperm mother cell, which will have 2 haploid nuclei. The anther, on the other hand, we start off with the microspore mother cell. No D voice on that one. It undergoes meiosis to form 4 haploid cells. The cells undergo mitosis to form 2 haploid nuclei. Remember, mitosis is the division of the nucleus. And then we have the Each nucleus has its specific name. One is the generative nucleus, and the other is the pollen tube nucleus. And then you put a tough coat around it, and you have pollen. So here's the egg cell development, which we have the endosperm, the megaspore mother cell here, meiosis, 4 haploid spores, one lives, the other dies. We have one haploid cell here, undergoes 3 mitotic divisions, and we have, right, the 2 synagogues on each side. This is the egg cell in the middle, and we have 2 haploid cells within the endosperm mother cell, and these are antibodal cells, which are on top. Don't know what they do, but that's what they are. So this is the egg cell development. And if you need to draw that, please draw that, because I'm sure at some point in time, you'll have to show me that you got it in your notes. By doing it again. The pollen, simple. One cell, microspore mother cell, 4 haploid cells. Each becomes a separate pollen grain. They undergo mitosis without cytokinesis, and you form 2 nuclei. One's a generative, and the other is the pollen tube nucleus. So pollination is when the pollen is carried to the stigma. How does that happen? By insects. Bees are the big one, right? And wasps, all sorts of insects carry pollen from one to another. You have wind, you have animals, you have rain. Any way that pollen can travel from one plant to another is pollination. Right? So pollination, the pollen, when it lands on the stigma, will germinate. So the pollen tube nucleus forms or starts to digest the style, and it forms a tunnel, and that tunnel is called the pollen tube. The generative nucleus stays close to the end of the pollen tube, but divides into 2 sperm nuclei. So the pollen tube nucleus is just eating its way through the style. The generative nucleus will divide into 2 sperm nuclei, and that tube will go all the way down the style up to the egg cell. Now, one of the sperm is going to fertilize the egg, and you'll get a diploid baby. The other sperm cell is going to fertilize the endosperm, and you're going to have a triploid endosperm. Now, this whole thing is called double fertilization because the egg and the endosperm is fertilized. We have here, pollen tube digests, right, all the way down here, and the pollen tube goes all the way down into the egg cell, and that's guided by the synagogues, right, on the other side. So we have the pollen tube nucleus at the top, not going to do anything to 2 sperm nuclei. One's going to fertilize the egg, and the other is going to fertilize the endosperm. The endosperm will divide to form the food for the baby. The zygote will divide and tissues will start to specialize, and you have 3 embryonic tissues: the protoderm, which will be the epidermis, the procambium, which will be the vascular tissue, and the ground meristem, which is everything in between. The ovulary will begin to swell and becomes a fruit, and the fruit is used for seed dispersal. The outer wall of the ovulary becomes thicker, and the petals no longer needed, so they fall off. So this right here, we have the endosperm, right? The egg cell. The egg cell starts to divide, and we start to have a seed. This right here, the ovulary, whatever's sitting inside, will start to swell to become a fruit. Now that fruit is often used for seed dispersal, getting the seed from one place to another. As the ovulary swells, the seed develops. Now, at some time, the plant cuts off all the glucose and nutrients to the fruit. The fruit begins to decay, and we call the decaying fruit a ripening fruit. The chlorophyll breaks down, exposing the carotenoids. The cellulose begins to break down, and the fruit becomes softer, and your fruit is ready for dispersal. And yep, you eat the decaying ovary of a plant, and it is good. Yum. So the seed needs to be dispersed. It used to be thought that the baby plant could not compete with mama plant, but it's probably because of the sunlight. So how are the seeds dispersed? Well, an animal can eat them and then poop the seeds out. Now, there are some seeds that needs to happen, like apple seeds need to go through the digestive system of a bird so that the gizzard can scarify the seed coat. Animals can carry seeds, as in burrs and the not the touch me nots, but the sweet tarts that stick everywhere. Seeds can float on water like coconuts, float on the air like dandelions. Now tell me, who has not picked up the dandelion seed and blown on it and watched it just float away? Maple trees also have those little things that are like the little whirligigs. Touch me nots. The seeds are thrown from the parent plant about a meter away. So once dispersed, the seed is exposed. It rains, water imbibes into the seed, and the seed expands. So the water moves into the seed by cohesion and adhesion, one of the properties of water. The seed breaks the seed coat, and the enzyme alpha amylase is activated. Now, alpha amylase will break down amylose, which is a starch found in the seed of the endosperm. The starch is broken down into glucose, and the cells of the seed of the baby can now use the glucose to produce energy and start to divide. The roots will grow down into the soil, the leaves or the cotyledon will grow up through the soil, and then you will have a germinating plant. And there's a picture of how we have different seeds dispersed. Coconut. And that's it. So if you have any questions, please review the video. And it's a short video here. Or you can read your textbook. It's a good textbook. Or you can even ask me in class tomorrow. Have a good night.